The snow fell thick and silent that December evening, coating the Boston streets in a blanket of white that muffled the usual city sounds. Margaret Hayes stood at her kitchen window, watching the flakes dance under the streetlights. At 58, she'd learned to appreciate these quiet moments. A cup of chamomile tea, the warmth of her modest brownstone apartment, and the simple pleasure of watching winter work its magic. She was about to settle into her favorite chair with a book when the doorbell rang. Margaret glanced at the clock, nearly 8 o'clock. Who could be visiting at this hour, especially in such weather? Through the peephole, she saw a young man holding a small child bundled in a pink snowsuit. Both looked thoroughly chilled, snowflakes clinging to their hair and clothes. The man appeared to be in his early 30s, with kind eyes that held a mixture of worry and exhaustion. The little girl, perhaps 3 years old, had her face pressed against his shoulder, her blonde curls peeking out from beneath a knitted cap. Margaret opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" The man shifted the sleeping child in his arms. "I'm so sorry to disturb you, ma'am. I'm Daniel Carson, and this is my daughter, Emma. We're staying at the bed and breakfast next door, but there's been some kind of plumbing emergency. The owner said the water's completely shut off for the night, and with the storm, everywhere else is booked solid." He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "She mentioned you sometimes help out in situations like this. I know it's an imposition, but would you happen to have a couch we could sleep on? Just for tonight. We'll be gone first thing in the morning." Margaret studied them for a long moment. In her younger years, she might have been more hesitant, but age had taught her to trust her instincts about people. There was something genuine in this man's eyes, a quiet desperation mixed with dignity. And the child, well, no one could look at that sleeping angel and not feel their heart soften. "Come in, please," she said, stepping aside. "You both look frozen through." The relief on Daniel's face was immediate. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I promise we won't be any trouble." As they entered, Margaret couldn't help but notice how carefully Daniel held his daughter, how his entire posture was protective and gentle. It reminded her of how her late husband Tom used to hold their own daughter back when Sarah was that age. That had been more than 30 years ago now. "Let me take your coats," Margaret said, her voice warm. "And I'll make you both some hot cocoa. When did you last eat?" Daniel settled Emma on the sofa, tucking a throw blanket around her small form. "We had lunch around noon. I kept meaning to stop, but Emma fell asleep in the car and I didn't want to wake her. She's been through a lot lately." Something in his tone made Margaret pause, but she didn't pry. Instead, she went to the kitchen and busied herself warming milk and finding the good cocoa her daughter had sent for Christmas. When she returned, Daniel was sitting on the floor beside the sofa, one hand resting gently on Emma's back. Watching her sleep with such tender attention, it made Margaret's throat tighten. "Here," she said softly, handing him a mug. "This will help warm you up." "You're very kind," Daniel said, accepting it gratefully. "I'm sorry for barging in like this. It's been a complicated few months." Margaret settled into her chair. She'd always been a good listener. It was one of the qualities that had made her successful in her 35 years at Morrison Technology Solutions, where she worked as the executive assistant to the CEO. "If you want to talk about it, I'm happy to listen. If not, that's fine, too." Daniel took a sip of cocoa and smiled. "This is perfect. My mother used to make it just like this." He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "Emma's mother, my wife, passed away 8 months ago. Cancer. It happened so fast." His voice caught slightly, and he cleared his throat. "I took some time off work to be with Emma to help her adjust. We've been living with my parents in Seattle, but I just accepted a new position here in Boston. We're supposed to start our new life after the holidays." "I'm so sorry for your loss," Margaret said quietly, and she meant it. She'd lost Tom to a heart attack 5 years ago, and she remembered all too well that particular kind of grief. It takes real courage to start over, especially with a little one to care for. "Some days I'm not sure I'm doing the right thing," Daniel admitted, his eyes still on Emma. "She's so young. She barely understands why her mother isn't here anymore. And now I'm uprooting her, bringing her to a new city where we don't know anyone." Margaret set down her tea. "May I tell you something I learned? When my husband died, I thought my world had ended. We'd been together for 32 years. But my daughter, She was grown by then, with her own family. She said something to me that helped. She said, "Mom, you're not betraying Dad by continuing to live. You're honoring him by showing that the love he gave you was strong enough to carry you forward." Daniel looked up at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "That's beautiful. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for," Margaret continued gently. "What matters isn't whether you make everything perfect. What matters is that she knows she's loved, that she's safe. Everything else, you'll figure out together." They talked for another hour, their conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Daniel told her about his background in business management, his hopes for this new position, his dreams of giving Emma a good life. Margaret shared stories about raising Sarah, about the joys and challenges of working while being a mother, about finding meaning in the everyday moments. Eventually, Margaret showed Daniel to the guest room. "You and Emma can sleep in here. The bed's quite comfortable. My daughter and grandson use it when they visit." "I couldn't possibly take your guest room," Daniel protested. "The couch is more than enough." "Nonsense," Margaret said firmly. "That child needs a proper bed, and so do you," I insist. As Daniel carried Emma to the room, the little girl stirred and opened her eyes. "Daddy," she murmured sleepily. "It's okay, sweetheart," Daniel whispered. "We're somewhere safe. This nice lady is letting us stay here tonight." Emma looked at Margaret with solemn blue eyes. "Hi," she said softly. "Hello, Emma," Margaret replied, her voice gentle. "Would you like to help me feed the fish before bed? I have a goldfish named Butterscotch who loves visitors." Emma's face brightened and she nodded. For the next 10 minutes, Margaret showed her the small aquarium in the living room, letting Emma drop in the fish food while explaining that Butterscotch was 17 years old and very wise. When Emma was finally tucked into bed, Daniel stood in the doorway of the guest room. "I don't know how to thank you properly. You've been incredibly generous to two strangers," Margaret smiled. "We're not strangers anymore. Besides, kindness isn't something you need to repay. You just pass it forward when you get the chance." The next morning, Margaret woke early and made a simple breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh fruit. She could hear Emma's delighted laughter from the guest room, followed by Daniel's deeper chuckle. It was a sound that hadn't filled her home in far too long, and it made her heart feel lighter. Over breakfast, Emma chattered about Butterscotch and asked Margaret dozens of questions about everything from the snow to the paintings on her walls. Daniel watched his daughter with evident joy, and Margaret could see how much healing had already begun in this little family. As they prepared to leave, Daniel handed Margaret a business card. "This has my contact information. Please, if there's ever anything I can do for you, don't hesitate to call. And when we're settled, I'd love to have you over for dinner. Emma and we'd like to stay in touch if that's all right with you." "I'd like that very much," Margaret said warmly. The following Monday, Margaret returned to work at Morrison Technology Solutions. The office was buzzing with unusual energy. Today was the day the new CEO would be arriving. The previous CEO had retired after 40 years with the company, and there had been much speculation about his replacement. Margaret had worked closely with 3 different CEOs during her tenure, and she'd learned that the change in leadership could transform a company's entire culture. She hoped this new person would be someone reasonable, someone who understood that the heart of any business was its people. At 9 o'clock sharp, the elevator doors opened and Margaret glanced up from her desk. Her breath caught in her throat. Walking toward her, wearing an impeccably tailored suit and carrying a briefcase, was Daniel Carson. Behind him walked Emma, holding the hand of an older woman who was presumably a nanny. Daniel's eyes widened as he recognized Margaret, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "Mrs. Hayes?" Margaret stood up, too stunned to speak for a moment. Around them, other employees had stopped to stare at the new CEO. Margaret began. "Your new boss, apparently," Daniel finished, his smile becoming almost sheepish. "I had no idea. When you said you worked at Morrison Tech, I thought, well, I didn't connect the dots." Emma spotted Margaret and broke free from the nanny's hand. "It's the fish lady," she exclaimed happily, running over. Margaret laughed and knelt down to Emma's level. "Hello again, sweetheart. I see you've brought your daddy to work." "He's going to be very important," Emma announced seriously. "But he promised I could visit sometimes." Daniel cleared his throat, clearly trying to maintain some professional dignity despite the circumstances. "Mrs. Hayes, I had no idea you were the executive assistant I'd be working with. The head office just told me I'd have an experienced EA who knew the company inside and out." "Well," Margaret said, standing and extending her hand formally, "it's a pleasure to make your professional acquaintance, Mr. Carson." He shook her hand, but his eyes were twinkling. "The pleasure is entirely mine. Though I should warn you, I've already experienced your management style, and I have a feeling you're going to keep me on my toes." As the day progressed, Margaret found herself marveling at the turn of events. Daniel was everything a good CEO should be: attentive, thoughtful, willing to listen before making decisions. He treated every employee with respect, from the janitor to the senior vice presidents, and when he had questions about company history or culture, he deferred to Margaret's knowledge without any hint of ego. During lunch, when they had a moment alone, Daniel said quietly, "I meant what I said about staying in touch. The fact that we'll be working together now, I hope that makes us colleagues, but I also hope we can still be friends. You helped Emma and me more than you know that night." "I feel the same way," Margaret replied honestly, "and I think you're going to do wonderful things here." "You have that rare quality. You lead with your heart as well as your head." Over the following months, they developed a strong working relationship built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Daniel proved to be an exceptional leader, implementing changes that improved both company culture and productivity. Margaret served as his trusted advisor, helping him navigate the complexities of the organization while offering the kind of wisdom that only comes with experience. Emma became a frequent visitor to the office, and Margaret kept a special drawer of coloring books and crayons just for her. The staff adored the little girl, and her presence seemed to remind everyone that beyond the spreadsheets and meetings, life was about the connections we make and the kindness we show. One evening, nearly 6 months after that snowy night, Margaret was preparing to leave when Daniel knocked on her office door. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course," she said, setting down her bag. "Emma and I are hosting a small dinner party this Saturday," he said. "Nothing fancy, just a few people who've become important to us since we moved here. We'd be honored if you'd come. And please, bring your daughter and her family if they're available." Margaret felt her eyes grow warm. "We'd love to come." That Saturday, as she sat around Daniel's dinner table, watching Emma show her grandson how to play with building blocks, listening to the easy laughter and genuine conversation, Margaret felt a deep sense of contentment. She thought about that snowy night when she'd opened her door to 2 strangers, never imagining how profoundly that small act of kindness would change all their lives. Sometimes, she reflected, the most important moments aren't the ones we plan. They're the ones where we simply choose to be present, to be kind, to open our hearts and our doors. And sometimes, those small gestures of humanity create ripples that extend far beyond anything we could have anticipated. Daniel caught her eye across the table and raised his glass slightly in a private toast. She smiled and did the same, grateful for the reminder that it's never too late to expand your family, to find new purpose, and to discover that kindness, both given and received, is the thread that weaves us all together.